Welcome to Solo Progression, the series where I play through Dungeon Defenders 1 Redux with the goal of beating the crystalline dimension on the hardest difficulty, as well as completing all the achievements. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 13 of Solo Progression. I don't really have anything to say before we're just hopping right into it, so the first map we'll be doing is the King's Game on Nightmare Hardcore Survival. From the last episode, you saw that we beat this map on Nightmare Hardcore, so I figured it would be best to do it on Survival and see what drops we can get. The thing with the King's Game, though, is that there is actually no rewards for beating this map. You do not get any familiars for like wave 15, wave 25. So the only reason to do this map is to get the better drops, but that's what we're looking for. So we're going to try to get better drops on this map, and we will likely see supreme weapons, maybe even ultimate weapons once we get to higher rounds because of the way the scaling works. Our setup this time was pretty similar to the same setup we had on Nightmare Hardcore Campaign, just refined a little bit more. Since the health scaling of the ogre is going to be an issue, I made sure to put physical beams to stop them before getting close. These actually came in clutch a whole bunch of times that I had like 5, 6, 7, 8 ogres just chilling right at the physical beam getting destroyed by my defenses, which is always nice, but also terrifying. You still want to put reflect beams in front of all your towers, not in front of the physical beams, because the goblin copters can shoot them, and if they shoot them, they will end up destroying them, because they just do so much damage, because generally they'll sit out of your strength drain aura range, or they'll do a lot of damage anyway, and you're hitting towers that don't have any defense health, so basically we'll destroy them very quickly and make you lose, because it destroys your buff beam. And during each of the waves, I'm trying to get the extra DU tile, as well as getting the upgrade all tile. I was kind of banking on the fact that I would get the upgrade all tile, but it's only like a 1 in 200. And I didn't end up getting it, so all my towers didn't get upgraded very fast. And we're going to jump ahead here, go to level, or I should say round 19. And I run into a bit of an issue. So I believe Leon ended up dying due to getting hit by rockets from the Goblin Copter, or Goblin Copter just straight up landing on him. But I kind of accounted for that by leaving Keel alive and phase shift, so I can just swap over and heal things in that case. And it would probably be a little rough, but I'd get through it. And this had worked on previous waves, but a Goblin Copter was shooting one of my spider minions, and it killed it and destroyed the tower buff beam. Because of this, I tried to salvage it by helping out with Keel, but it was not going to be enough. I ended up losing. So I didn't get any wave rewards on this map, which you don't get anyway. So it didn't really matter, and we ended up getting some pretty good drops anyway, so it worked out. And since we were able to beat King's Game, or at least get pretty far in survival mode, I figured we can probably do Arcane Library on Nightmare Hardcore. One of the nice things with this map, too, is that you always get a bunch of drops at the end of it, and they give pretty good rare qualities on them. I've seen Ultimates, I've seen Supremes, I don't think I've seen Ultimate Pluses, but you get some pretty good weapons from this map. This time with the map, we're able to deal with the Harbingers pretty easily, using Deadly Striker Towers to snipe them if they're hiding away. Now, for this map, I also made it so I only use 2 buff beams, 1 at each crystal. Now, these buff beams would basically encompass both the aura stacks, or on the bottom one, it was just the aura stack, or I call it the bottom one, the one that's on the west side, I believe it is. That only had 1 aura stack, which was sort of terrifying because I didn't want my crystal to get attacked. And this really only covered if enemies were right next to the crystal. So after the buff beam, it kind of spread out far enough that it did a little bit more than that. But I made sure to have physical blockades, or not physical blockades, actually, I had magic blockades from the apprentice on each of the little staircases, and this is blocking enemies off for enough time to have my defenses on the buff beam attack and destroy all of them. Now, I'm not too sure if I've done it in this episode or in previous episodes, but one of the tricks I've learned is that with the minions, you can use move defensive. I think the default key is 9 to place the minions right on top of each other, or you can place them right on top of towers. And this can be super useful because you can just set a buff beam for 4D instead of 60U. Still place your regular towers, and then just move all your archers or mages right on top of that. And you basically have this 4DU buff beam. And now, instead of using 2 60U buff beams like I use in this map, I can use 3 4DU buff beams for the same amount of DU. Speaking of DU, the reason why I use these magic blockades is that they only cost 1 DU. And I think at the end of the map, before I put those down, I only had 4 DU left. So they were definitely just a no-brainer on what to use. And they had pretty good health anyway, because Silas just has some defense health innately from all his equipment, so it worked out pretty well. Also, we ended up leveling Mercy, our Huntress, to level 74 to help her get some mythical gear on, which she'll be useful later on. Ended up getting our first ultimate weapon too from this, but I'm pretty sure it was way worse than what we could use, so not useful, but it was still cool to see. On the next step, we tried out Crystal Cave, and this was a complete mistake. I had no preparation. I kind of wanted to see what this map was. I don't think I've ever played it. I was just seeing if it was feasible to do. It's not right now. We'll go back to this later. This is sort of the testing phase of the video. So the next map I try is Coastal Bazaar on Nightmare Hardcore Campaign. I was able to get past the first and second wave, but it was definitely rough, and if I didn't have Leon on the field, I would just not win. I kind of just placed all the towers right next to the crystals and hope for the best. I think at some point I'll need to have some sort of defense in mind when I'm building this map, or just have blockades in the right areas, maybe bigger auras. Not sure what the best course strategy on this map is. I've never played this map, but I do want to come back to this map. I think this map is definitely doable. It is going to be difficult to adjust this map because it's very open. I believe the reason why I died is just because there was too many ogres coming in. The crystals were kind of in such a weird space. They have, I think, 3 or 4 different entrances you gotta kind of cover for. So if your auras are big enough, it's nice. You can get rid of all the little enemies. And then you need to have, like, assume a buff beam to just kind of coast over each of the crystals and attack whatever's coming to them. I just don't have all that stuff yet, or I just haven't optimized it yet. So I'll come back to this map at some point. But until then, we will try different maps until then. So next up, I have a nice fun clip here of me playing Palantir. It's going pretty well on wave 9. I figured I'd skip ahead, and I fall off the map and die as soon as the wave starts, which precedes me to lose the map on this one. I think I'm cursed. This map does not like me. Alright, let's get some actual progress in here. I hopped to City and Cliffs on Nightmare Hardcore Campaign. The reason being is that I want to unlock this map for survival, so we can get Jinlets, which is a familiar that attacks and gives us mana similar to the genies. I think they're a little bit worse than the genies to use, but I do like them. I plan on getting some just because the early waves, having a pet on Leon would be nice to do damage, as well as getting mana from them. And it also helps us in our favor that on Nightmare mode, pets, familiars do more damage anyways, so very useful to have a pet that not only does damage, but gives us some mana. Now let's talk more about the map. There are technically, I believe, 5 choke points. It's sort of weird. At least 5 choke points that I held. But then there are also the Wyverns and Goblin Coffers to take account for, so you end up with auras kind of just all around the map just to deal with those. The biggest issue on this map is definitely the Goblin Copters, since they drop off ogres either in the middle of the map or right next to your crystals on either side of the map, which is a huge pain. But we set up defenses in such a way that we can deal with those, or we can just deal with them ourselves. The other issue is that the Goblin Copters themselves can be an issue. They will drop off the ogre in the center of the map, and then they'll kind of just go off to one of your defenses. And the issue with this is that sometimes they'll be kind of like out of a line of sight of your towers, and your towers won't attack them, or they'll be right outside your auras, and they'll attack your towers anyway. The issue with this is that they'll destroy your towers, and you're not really doing anything to deal with them, because your minions or whatever are attacking what's in front of them, and the Goblin Copter is like off to the side shooting them. Anyways, it'll destroy them, and it's not going to go well. On this first attempt, I ultimately decided to restart, since I messed up how I wanted to place my defenses, and I figured I would lose anyway. Now onwards to the second attempt. I tried opting for placing buff beams and then towers on top of them for the first wave. I figured this would be useful in the long run, since I could just get those tower buff beams up and place auras during the round. This ended up being a mistake, since auras are just too good to not place right away. They just cover so much, they will kill all the small enemies, and you just go and kill off the enemies that are ogres or whatever is giving you trouble. So, didn't end up working for this time, and we're going to go and try this again. I think the main issue with what I was trying here is that they just got overrun, I believe. I was still trying to place auras during the round, but the Djinns were just destroying them. The ogres were destroying the towers. The magic missile towers are placed down. It just wasn't going to work out unless I had auras in each lane to deal with all the enemies. The other thing, too, to deal with is the Djinns will destroy your auras if they're not inside them, or they're just not getting attacked. So these are all things you have to account for when you're doing these maps, and especially with a map like City in the Cliffs, where it is so big and it's very difficult to traverse. It becomes very difficult if any of your defenses get overrun to just get over there in time and be able to help it out. That said, learning from my mistakes, we move on to attempt 3, which ended up being our best and final attempt, because we do end up beating it, spoilers. I started off with auras, and then as the waves progressed, I made sure to count where the goblins were going to drop off their ogres and where wyverns were coming in from. Using this knowledge, I placed physical beams to block off the choke points, as well as where ogres were either dropped off besides the center. That one doesn't really matter because they'll just go to a lane. The Goblin Copters actually are more dangerous than the ogres they drop off in the middle. Now, I should have placed a physical beam somewhere near the east crystal because they were getting dropped off over there, and then they could walk around and go up to where my crystal is. The ogres are kind of dumb. They'll attack your defenses before they attack the crystal in front of them. That said, with all in consideration, this is probably one of the harder maps in the game. On the first round, you have the mini ogres that spawn, and I think they spawn 3 at a time on 2 different lanes. So you can't be there at the same time unless you have 2 characters, which I just don't have 2 characters to handle ogres. which makes it a bit difficult. But once you get past that first wave, I believe it just gets much easier to beat the rest of the level. Usually you'll have trouble on the first, second, or third wave, and then if you get past those, you can kind of make it to the last wave, and then the last wave is the time you'll have trouble. So that said, I'm going to skip forward ahead here to the final wave. It's not really much to say about sitting cliffs once you get past the first few waves and you are able to account for everything. You'll see that my setup here, most of it consists of Fireball Towers, Deadly Striker Towers, Mage Minions, Archer Minions, Auras everywhere, and just having physical blockades where the ogres drop off. See that? We end up beating this map on Nightmare Hardcore, which means we can go back to it on Nightmare Hardcore Survival Mix Mode, which will give us a good shot of getting a good Ginlet to use at some point during this game. With that, we'll move on to our next map here. We'll actually be doing another survival one. And you might have guessed we went back to the Dread Dungeon on Nightmare Hardcore Mixed Mode Survival Mode. I gotta say, guys, I don't know what it is this map, but I always come back to it. I think it is pretty neat. Now, this map is not very tough, as you can see, because I beat it very easily in Nightmare Hardcore. The first wave is generally the hardest, and this kind of applies the same on Nightmare Hardcore, but it's not difficult. And once you get your defenses up, there's only 70 D on this map and 3 choke points, so pretty much all the lanes are set up very minimally. Each lane has aura stacks, a tower buff beam, a reflect beam, as well as a few mage minions and archer minions, as well as fireball towers to deal with the goblin copters and the other big mobs that come that way. One thing I noticed is that ogres like to get stuck at the bottom, and at the end of the rounds, Djinns will get stuck. I think I had a round where my Leon died, and I'm just waiting for the Djinn to die, and my other characters are just like, they can't kill it either, so they kind of like bait the Djinn over to get killed. Yeah, it was rough. That said, since we're doing this on Nightmare Hardcore Mixed Mode, loot ends up being pretty good. We start seeing some Supreme armor pieces, as well as a bunch of Transcendent weapons and armor pieces too. Don't think any of the Supreme equipment we got was any good, but I think a weapon was good. I think a weapon for silence was good. But the Transcendent pieces I ended up being really good for Leon. I think he has probably the highest stats of everyone, like, all together, which is really nice because he is not putting upgrade points into, like, tower damage or anything. It's all into resistances first, and then the tower damage, which is, like, 100 upgrades to max that first. Oh, and one thing to note is that I have Deft equipped with a Huntress Guardian. The Huntress Guardian increases the attack speed of nearby towers up to 5 towers. I use him on one of the choke points that is dealing with the Goblin Copters. On Wave 15, we get some dragons that were Transcendent quality, but they were still garbage, so we aren't going to use them. And after that, we get to Wave 25 after some time, and get rewarded with the pet Nessie. Now, Nessie is like an interesting pet. It always has plus 100 to each stat, I believe. But the pets I have now are just way better. I think I have a pet that has over... The seahorses have like plus 300 on each of them. They're just so good. Have those equipped on everyone. And yeah, that's Dread Dungeon. The gear we got here was pretty good, but doing the harder maps will get us better gear and hopefully a better pet. And that'll be tackled in the next episode though, but let's go over the stats we have now. So Leon got a new weapon, which is a melee-based weapon, which will be nice, as well as having pretty great tower stats now with the Transcendent pieces we've equipped him with. I am kind of surprised how well Hybrid is working for him. Up next, Keel has some upgrades to their armor, which increased their tower damage by around 600, but it lowered our flash heal and tower health by a good amount, so I don't know if that trade-off is going to be worth it, but for now, it is fine. Deft now boasts the first good Supreme weapon that we have, as well as having both the highest tower damage and tower attack speed, and these were increased significantly from the last episode, which is really nice. And then we have Silas, who got the least amount of upgrades, and some accessory items were added, but we found boots that were better, but only after we added a ton of investment into them. But he's still the core of our whole tower damage combo we're going here. I haven't equipped any gear yet onto Mercy, I believe, and if I did, it's the same gear she's currently wearing. I haven't upgraded it, so I'll show her off the next episode that she's actually going to be used in. But yeah, until then, we'll be hitting up Aquanos and the other Lost Shard DLC in the next episode, and hopefully get an even better Seahorse or just even better loot from those maps on Nightmare Hardcore. So stay tuned for the next episode. Hopefully see you there. Have a good one.